WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint.
Thanks for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Ben Thompson. This week, Vice President Kamala Harris and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg were here in Charlotte. They were here to tout that $1 trillion infrastructure bill. WCNC Charlotte's Hunter Sines was there and spoke one-on-one with Secretary Buttigieg about how this bill could really help transform the Queen City.
First off, why Charlotte on one of your stops touting this plan?
Well, three things I would point to. A great track record, a lot of growth, and a lot of need. If you look at what it's going to take for Charlotte to continue its economic success, there have to be more and better options to connect people to jobs, to opportunities, to school, to each other. And, you know, that's something that there's been a lot of innovation here, both with this mayor and in previous years. We want to make sure we're supporting that. And the reality is you've had communities like Charlotte that have been innovating, thinking about the future, putting their money where their mouth is, but they haven't had the support that they deserve from Washington. Year after year of talk in Washington about, oh, we're going to do infrastructure. It's infrastructure week, get ready. And now it actually is. We're finally doing it.
One of the things, and you saw it for yourself here, are these electric vehicles, not only in our transit systems, but it's really improving, trying to boost the amount of electric vehicles that are used by everyday people. How are you going to do it? What's the goal? And how are you going to make it affordable?
Well, one of the first things we have to do is act to make it more affordable. You know, if you have an electric vehicle, you benefit from fuel savings, but that doesn't do you any good unless you can afford it in the first place. That's why the Build Back Better law calls for a major tax credit to reduce that price. We've also got to make sure we have the right charging infrastructure. You know, if you live in a standalone house, then you already have charging infrastructure. It's the plug in your wall. But if you're in a high-rise building or an area where you don't have that kind of service, that makes it easy to get from where you live to where you're driving to if you go long distances. That's where we got to think about more charging infrastructure. This bill, the bill that just passed and was signed, that provides for 500,000 charging stations around the country. And we're also excited about more and more of those vehicles being made here in the United States by American workers, creating jobs as we go.
We, of course, have this transformational mobility network that I know you've heard about, and it includes a silver and a red line. The red line specifically is something we have not been able to do because Norfolk Southern has derailed it, for lack of a better term. What is the federal government, what can they do to try to make them, you know, more agreeable to things like this and not be a barrier to a booming city like Charlotte?
Well, we are calling on freight operators to work well in partnership with passenger operators, while of course protecting their legitimate business interests. And without knowing all of the details of this case, I think there are more ways to get to yes that we need to continue looking for. And my department is ready to convene the players and do anything we can to help that work, because a good rail system is one that can move goods, of course, but also people efficiently.
I want to ask, of course, about this supply chain issue. It's one thing to throw money at all of these states in various ways like this bill does, but when you don't have the labor to do it and costs are going up in construction, how are you going to tackle that?
Yeah, well, this is one of the reasons why we're paying a lot of attention to things like workforce too, and the Build Back Better agenda will help more people rejoin the labor force by helping with issues like childcare. We've also got to make sure we have the right kind of skill training for the future. But in the long run, economists mostly agree that this will help ease the inflationary pressures we're seeing. After all, the problem with inflation is it creates higher costs for families. The whole idea of this bill is to lower costs for families, whether we're talking about insulin, prescription drugs, childcare, electric vehicles, so many things that are a pressure on families now. We can make that a little easier.
But how with a labor shortage, because so many people are just not wanting to work at this point? How are we going to fix that when it comes to these construction projects?
Well, one thing we do see is a very strong pipeline into skilled trades, especially the work that unions are doing to bring more people into these really high-paying jobs that don't require a college degree. I think there's still a lot of folks out there who don't realize just how much money you can make without having a university degree if you're prepared to do an apprenticeship or get those skills. We are going to need a lot more of that, but I'm very confident that the American people are up to the job.
My last question here, circling back to this transit plan of ours. We talk about light rail a lot in this city. We have the blue line, you're sitting on the gold line here. Are we thinking futuristically enough, though? Because trains and things like this have been around for a while. We have some of our leaders here who say we're not pushing the envelope hard enough.
Well, we need to do all of the above, right? So there's some very exciting future innovations around things like drones that we got to be preparing for. But, there's also a million-year-old transportation technology called walking, which we've got to make easier and safer in some of our urban areas. So whether you walk, bike, or roll, whether you drive or rely on transit, we've got to make sure all of those fit together. And the great thing about transit is it makes people better off who use transit, and it even makes people better off who don't use transit because it means less congestion on the roads.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you so much.
Some promising developments coming out of that interview. Hunter Sines, thank you for that. Coming up after the break, this week, the North Carolina Lieutenant Governor found himself in hot water again. A fellow Republican calling his statements unacceptable. That's next.